Long ago in December of 2023, so like 7 months before this video, I started a weak attempt to turn our game concept into reality by putting an armadillo model with a few animations into Godot. This attempt went horribly, and very little remains from it now, including those animations. Now that I'm older, wiser, more experienced in Godot, and very importantly, I have a functional structure that I can work off of built by someone who is much more competent in programming than I am, I decided it's time to try and add new animations again. We're Stump and Stem, and we're making a farming and cooking game called Aardvark Agriculture. Today we're working on something which is so all-encompassing that I completely forgot about it in our roadmap. It's the ability to interact with things. More specifically, it's the ability to carry things. We took a lot of inspiration from Harvest Moon 1 on the Game Boy for its minimalist town menu, but the thing that was much more important to us about the classic Harvest Moon games that we want to emulate was actually the way that they had no inventory. The back and forth of going between harvest and shipping bin forced you to slow down and take the game at a more calm and meditative pace. Having no inventory at all isn't an option for us, because you can't actually cook anything if you can't store and transport food. So we found a sort of middle ground by turning the classic shipping box into a heavy backpack. It's too big to use while you're carrying it, but it's small enough that you can carry it around to wherever you need it. Also, in the spirit of not having an inventory, your watering can and any seed bags you buy will work in a very similar way. The trouble is, even if it's critical to our vision of the game, having to lumber back and forth with big, cumbersome objects has the potential to be pretty annoying. We're sure that we can tweak and adjust how this all works without compromising our vision, but to do that we need something to test with. And since I'm an artist before I'm a programmer, the animations take priority. So the first thing that I had to do was fix the armadillo's rig. When I first made it, I forgot to modify the hands so that they wouldn't rotate along with the rest of the arms whenever they moved. This little misstep made it next to impossible to make it look like the armadillo is actually holding something, which is a little bit of an issue since we need it to hold a lot of things. And after that I had to make sure that none of the other objects in the file had any animation data on them, since that made a huge mess for us the last time I tried this. After that I could finally make the animations, and I had something of a strategy in mind going in. In the game, the box is going to be an object that sits on the ground until you pick it up, at which point it will automatically attach to your back. Because the connection happens inside of Godot, my theory was that if I animated it how I normally would by just dragging the box into place and going from there, the offset of box to body would be completely wrong when I put it in the engine. My workaround was to parent the box to one of the bones of the spine and have the box inherit its rotation. That way, the box should always be in the correct position and the animation will still be nice and weighty, because the rotation of it will be accurate to the rotation on the armadillo's body. This also had the surprise added benefit of saving me a ton of work, because I didn't have to animate the rotation at all, and it made the animation way more consistent, because in Blender, I can toggle whether or not the box is copying the rotation at any time I want. So I can freely check how everything looks while the armadillo's carrying it, but then I can turn it right back off when it came time for export. And by the way, the box is the only item in the game that will even use animations like this. While it took me ages to get just one animation with this box done in the past, I had a whole set for wearing it, walking with it, and taking it on and off in just a few hours. Now it was time to take it all into Godot for the moment of truth and see if any of my theories actually held water. So I imported everything, got stuff set up with the animation libraries and all that, and got to testing stuff out just to realize that, while the box worked totally fine, the armadillo's animations wouldn't play at all. Like, they had no response whatsoever. So after tons of searching, both in and out of Godot, we parsed that the animations were looking for a skeleton 3D node that was related to the newly imported model, rather than the general skeleton node that lived on our actual player instance. We looked all around for ways to change what the animation was looking for in the import, but in the end all we could find was to go to the individual animations and rename the text field. But that was a lot of work, and renaming the skeleton itself ended up actually solving the problem in the same way, while it fixed the existing animations at the same time. So we did that. And then everything broke. The animations now ran, but each of the new animations was its own kind of nightmare fuel, and no amount of re-exporting or changing the import settings could save it. I had no idea what happened that could be causing this, because the only thing that I changed in the skeleton was a single checkbox in the hands. If it was just the hands that were in hell, then that would make sense. Obviously this was an issue with Godot and not Blender, so I needed to find Godot solutions. My options were firstly and most obviously to make a bone map for the armadillo, which I had been avoiding up to this point because I thought it seemed complicated and unnecessary for just one animated character. As it turns out, the user-friendly version of the bone map only works for basic humanoids, which our be-eared and be-tailed little creature most certainly is not, so I would have to make my own custom one. Allow me to share what comes up when you try to make a custom bone map. It is blank. I open up more details, and it's blank. I go to add new details, and it's blank. The documentation for this is also blank, because there's only explanations for how to use the built-in humanoid bone map. Now, to be fair, if I referenced what was going on with the humanoid map and paid attention to what every little menu and setting actually was, I would probably be able to eventually figure something out. But is it worth my time and energy to do that? Absolutely not. So we move on to my second option, which was to re-import the mesh along with every single pre-existing animation and replace all of it. I had already confirmed that it was just the armadillo that was broken, since importing a new test animation with the box worked just fine. I wasn't pleased with this solution, but I couldn't see any other way at the time. The process wasn't as simple as making a new export and swapping out the old and new files. First, I had to fix any animations that were messed up by the hand modification. Then, once I got it exported into Godot, I had to delete the old armadillo files and surgically remove the mesh and skeleton that had baked themselves into the player instance, taking much care not to delete the attached animation data while I was at it. And then I replaced it with all the new stuff. Finally, things worked beautifully, except for a few animations that we'd cooked together in-engine which got destroyed. Those went on the to-do list. First, for my sanity, I needed to get done the thing that I came here for in the first place, which was make a box, and make it so that you can pick it up with functioning animations. Fortunately, I was able to check if the animations were generally functional without programming first. I just popped a bone attachment into the same part of the spine that I had the box parented to in Blender and stuck the box into it for fine positional tweaking. After that, I made a quick instance for the box so that I could give it its own animation player and state machine, so that I could force it to play animations while it was on the armadillo's back. The animations didn't quite line up, but it was passable enough for now. At this point, Stump had started trying to get the crop growing system in place, which in theory was something completely different from anything that I was working on, but in reality it was exactly the same. In order to grow crops, we had to plant seeds, and in order to plant seeds, we needed a seed bag tool, which, like my box, needed to be picked up and carried around, just in the hand rather than on the back. In essence, the code required to pick up and use both of these items, as well as any other tool that we need to have, is the same. Basically, what Stump built was a special class for interactable objects, which all tools fall under. When the armadillo interacts with something, it asks, "Hey, what are you?" And the tool responds by telling the armadillo both what it is and what it's able to do. So instead of digging when you click, you perform the tool's action instead. Luckily for me, this perfect timing meant that I wouldn't have to try and program anything myself to get the box picked up. All I needed to do was hook the animations up to the code. Which would have been great if it didn't turn out that I'm still way worse at coding than I realized. I could not even begin to parse how to make the animations function, so I stepped back and went to fix the animations that I broke while Stump sorted out the tools for me. I learned a lot over the absolutely ridiculous amount of time that it took for me to resolve this. For example, I finally understand how animation state machines work. I was correct before in my assumption that the state machine was pretty useless, because at the time the game was just triggering one animation after the other. Now that they are transitional states, and fairly complicated ones at that, it makes a lot more sense to have it. Now I'm left to question having the transitions at all because, well, they don't look very good right now. They need more work. There's a possibility that we tweak the controls themselves to make the animations work better, like lock you out of inputs until an animation has fully played, and for some animations we should definitely do that, but for others I'm not so sure. I really value snappy and responsive controls in these types of games, so to me that takes priority over any fancy transitions. We'll see what happens with that in the future. This trivial scenario surprisingly led to a massive amount of work getting done on the game, which is really exciting. Next time we'll be able to share in much more detail what happened on Stump's side of things. I'm sure you're curious how the new animations worked out after that whole fiasco we started with. They went in flawlessly. It was just the tiny change to the hands that ruined everything in the end. It wasn't a Godot problem at all. Isn't that great? Anyways, thank you so much for watching, and please subscribe if you want to keep up with our future progress.